I'm Cormac O'Malley, son of General Ernie O'Malley. Welcome to Ernie's Journey, the monthly series where I share stories about my father's role during the Irish War of Independence and the Irish Civil War from 1920 to 1924. How he left studying medicine to train thousands of volunteers to fight the British, and he rose to the highest ranks of the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, by age of 23. How he was imprisoned, tortured, and escaped. These are some of the stories. Welcome to Ernie's Journey. In this episode, I want to cover a couple of points. The first being the oath administered to the IRA in 1920. Second, how the IRA tactics were changing during that time. And thirdly, the death by assassination of Thomas Mccurtain. So in the first instance, I want to read what the oath was. And this is an oath which Michael Collins told Ernie O'Malley was under discussion when Ernie was working under Michael Collins in Dublin in early 1920. And the oath reads as follows. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I do not and shall not yield a voluntary support of any pretended government, authority, or power within Ireland, hostile or inimical thereto. And I do further swear or affirm that to the best of my knowledge and ability, I shall support and defend the Irish Republic, which is Dáil Éireann, against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I take the obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. So help me God. Now, this was a very important oath because it comes in the transition of the Dáil Éireann creating the first Irish government, and the Irish volunteers being put under the Dáil. And so the Irish volunteers suddenly became the Army of the Irish Republic. We know them today as the IRA, but it was really the army underneath that Dáil Éireann Republic. The evening that Collins told Ernie about the oath, Ernie happened to be on an inspection for some volunteers, and he went out and administered the oath right away to these volunteers. Collins heard about this. He always had a way of finding out things, and he reprimanded Ernie by asking him, who the bloody hell gave you permission to administer the oath? It hasn't been even ratified by the brigade's command. So here's another example, of the personality of Collins, but also of how Ernie would take action over something that he thought good. And in his introduction to his book On Another Man's Wound, he writes that he was drawn into the fight to the responsibility of action. And so throughout, whether it's in 1916 or here, when he saw something good, he decided to go for it. The second point, which I want to comment on, is how the IRA tactics were changing at this point. Prior to 1920, the IRA was busy in recruiting, training, arming where they could, organizing their brigades, but there was no great strategic decisions made as to how the fight should be fought. And so in early 1920, there had been occasional activities, but things started to become more organized and coordinated. And early in that year, the technique of attacking the RIC barracks as a source to secure arms and munitions and grenades and all of that, because that was a place in the local community where they were kept. And so a plan was devised bit by bit throughout the country, starting in West Cork, and then Clare, Kilkenny, Tipperary, and Monaghan, where Ernie was involved in the Ballytrain. And so within the first couple of months of 1920, there was a whole series of incidents where action was taken against the RIC. This became quite, as the technology, as the capacity to do that grew, Ernie and other organizers went around and spread the word, and local people learned how to do that. Now, on April 3, 1920, there were over 300 abandoned RIC barracks, already abandoned by them, and they were burned by the IRA in a concerted effort to make sure that the RIC did not have access to those burned out facilities to return and use them. Another coordinated effect was on April 5, was to burn the local tax offices around Ireland. And so in the small towns and large towns, a coordinated effort was made to burn a considerable number of offices. Now, these local tax offices were critical to the British Empire in a certain sense, because they got information from people in terms of income, and they also got the actual money, because people paid into them. So by burning these tax offices, the IRA had a very effective tool in terms of being seen by the people, but also making sure that the empire didn't get those funds. About this time also, the IRA announced that they were going to kill spies. Now, it's a very minor element in part, but by making the broadcast, it must have put fear into all of those people who would otherwise have perhaps been inclined to talk to the RIC, and it sent a signal. And about the same time, in early April, the IRA developed a new technique, which was the use of the hunger strike. Now, the hunger strike was to be used in the future as a sort of a political token of the IRA. But in this case, when the volunteers were either waiting for trial or had been tried, they went on hunger strike. The prison gardeners had no idea what to do with them. And so eventually, for the most part, the guardians released the prisoners rather than have them die on their watch. The third point I want to talk about today is Thomas Mccurtain. Now, a terrible thing happened on March 20, 1920, which was the assassination in front of his wife and 3 children in Cork of the Lord Mayor of Cork. This was a cruel and devastating event. It had tremendous repercussions because suddenly it got great publicity in England and Ireland, and suddenly what the IRA and others had been saying about the British and the way that they were controlling Ireland became public knowledge. Assassinating a mayor was a terrible thing. And so, and just a couple of months later, Terence Mcsweeney, who was arrested as, again, a Sinn Féin Lord Mayor, successor to Mccurtain in Cork, he was arrested, and he died after 74 days on hunger strike. So these were important developments in giving the IRA bolstered effect and showing that they had the stomach for the fight. So that's all for this month. Thank you very much indeed. Bye.